before we head into lunch, Stav Shaffir comes to us from the beating heart of the social justice movement in Israel, where last summer, as part of this great wave of protests all over the world, mobilization all over the world that we saw from the Arab Spring through Occupy Wall Street, people started in tents in one main square in Tel Aviv, and at its peak, the social justice movement in Israel counted more than 400,000 people at its climactic rally. That's about the equivalent of about 16 million people rallying in the United States all at once. And she's going to talk to us about open source culture and social justice in the global justice movement. Stav Shaffir.
Hi. We're going to start by screening a video. Is it ready?
להפגנה הכי גדולה שהייתה לנו בהיסטוריה. העם דורש צדק חברתי. העם דורש צדק חברתי. העם דורש צדק חברתי.
This is last August in Israel. And if you asked me, and around this time last year, if something like this is possible, I would say, well, not really here. And I'll take a wild guess and try to think how many people in this audience discovered the internet like myself when they were around the age of 9 or 10. That was at the time when the internet had that funny connection sound. Do you remember it? A really long 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 minutes long connection sound that was funny because that really weird sound made it seem like we were being transformed into some kind of a parallel universe. Now, I think that today we know that this was actually true. We were transformed into a new reality. We just didn't really know about it. And in that reality, the reality that my generation, and I'm sure that you share, there are new rules. The internet actually taught us a few new things about ourselves and about freedom. It taught us that everything was possible, that knowledge was accessible. There is no knowledge or no piece of information that you cannot Google. If it's not on Google, so it's probably illegal or doesn't exist. There are no people that we cannot communicate. People are accessible. They're searchable. We can find them. We can create paths to talking to them. It changed our way of thinking in such a deepest way that when we realized who were the only people that we could not communicate, we got really, really angry. And they were our politicians. The only people who don't communicate with us, the only people who are not accessible to us, are the people who have the responsibility on our life, on our worlds, on our countries, states, world, everything. And they're not accessible. And they're the only people who seem to be there to try and prevent us from knowing things, from having access to their way of thinking, to how they make decisions. So if you ask me, I think that this year's uprising of people all around the world to protest about their situation, about their freedoms, had one source, and it was it. It was the gap between that freedom that we're already aware of, that new world, and the old world that our systems, our countries, and our states everywhere still try to watch and keep. So if to go back to the Israeli movement, Israel, I'm not sure if you're aware, is a land of conflicts. And I'm not talking only about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. No, it's not the only one. That's only one problem, but we have many others. 20% of the Israeli population is Arab. Most of them self-defined as Palestinians, never got fully integrated or got their equal rights. On the paper, yes, but in reality, no, in the Israeli society. Out of the 7.5 million people who live in Israel, 1 million is of Russian orientation, immigrated to Israel during the 80s and the 90s, again, not fully integrated. And we have immigration from Ethiopia, and again, with no integration. And we have many other minority groups. There's a huge conflict between the ultra-Orthodox community, the Jewish community, and the secular community. There's a huge conflict between the Arabs and the Jewish population, huge conflict between the different migration groups, and that put together with the bigger conflict with the Palestinians, with the neighboring countries, and you have many problems to deal with. It's a big social experiment. And all of that reality is framed in a picture of big fear. Our governments, and that's right-wing governments and left-wing governments, scared us all around the way, terrified us with threats on our security, on our economy, on everything. When you open the paper in Israel, you see Iran or the Palestinians. That's about it. You don't look at your own society. And for us as activists, this was very misleading. For many years, we looked at the bigger problems, not seeing our own society, not seeing how it's falling apart. But then something happened. Last year, I worked as a journalist, focused on my master's and on various activist fields, from asylum seekers to the Palestinian conflict to education, everything. There are so many problems, as I said, you only have to pick one. But I couldn't pick one because they all seemed very much related. And one day, somebody told me that there was this gathering of people on Facebook who wanted to start a demonstration about the prices of housing. Now, I thought, well, you know, housing, it's a problem. I had to move myself 4 times this year, but is this Israel's biggest problem? Do I want to spend my time doing that? But out of some curiosity, I went and met that group. And we sat together and talked about a very simple problem. And here I'm getting to the topic of this talk, and that's open source. I think that this protest movement could not exist without a very specific strategy, and that's the open source strategy. The first rule in that strategy is that you have to start very simple. And that's what we did. We talked about a very, very simple problem, housing. We decided to pitch tents in one of the main and richest boulevards in Tel Aviv, the Rothschild Boulevard. And on that very day, the police called us to say that we were not allowed to protest. It was really weird because this wasn't a protest about any radical issue. It was only about housing. And that made a lot of people angry and brought them to the boulevard, even if housing wasn't the one thing they had in mind. So they came, and we sat there late afternoon with a bunch of tents, and nobody knew what we were doing. But they kept on coming because it was interesting. Now, the second rule in the open source is you probably know from technology, is that you have to trust people. You have to allow freedom in order to encourage freedom. So on the second day, when somebody called me and said, "Hey, is it okay if I pitch a tent in Jaffa?" I had to say, yes, of course, just go and do it. So somebody pitched a tent in Jaffa, and then another one pitched a tent in Haifa, and another one in Eilat, and within a week we had 20 tent camps around Israel. After a month, we had 120 tent camps. And this was just the beginning. We started to sit in circles, gatherings of hundreds of people who came to the boulevard to sit and talk and share their problems. It's amazing to see how those communities were run like a chat room, like a community on Facebook. They came and sat and shared their most intimate problems without knowing each other, without knowing who they were belonged to, but just talking, having that open space to talk. We decided that we're allowing everybody to enter. There was one accident when a politician, it was also an accident, when a politician stepped into the boulevard, surrounded with cameras, and she started to express her support alleged support in the movement. I support, oh, what you guys are doing is amazing. It's a beautiful thing. Thanks God you finally woke up. But she didn't talk to us. She talked to the cameras. So the first rule we established in the Boulevard was that if you're a politician and you want to join, you have to join. You have to be inside, sit with us on the ground, and talk in your turn. Not to the cameras, but to us, because everybody is equal in this community. It's amazing to see how the system of gestures that we had in order to respond to what other people were saying was similar, again, to social networks. We had hand gestures. We did this when we approved something, and this when we disapproved, or we did this when somebody was talking too much. But it was all very, very simple. So we had our new ways of communication. The third thing we had to do was to not be identified. No logo policy. Don't come with your political party T-shirts. Don't come with your organization signs. Just come as you are. This had a very, very important mission, and that was to confuse our enemy, to confuse the system, to confuse the government, but also to make people think. Because in the Israeli atmosphere, and I don't think that's only an Israeli problem, people stopped thinking. They only started to look at the logo and then to say what they think about the logo. Oh, this belongs to a lefty group, so it's not me because I'm on the right. Oh, no, this is of the settlers. That's of the religious people, so I'm not there. Because you have a list. It's like you have a list of people that you're supposed to hate. And in order to make people change their lives, they have to start and think. And to make them think, they have to be very confused. So there was no logo, and there was this open community, and we had to go from there. Now, the other thing about confusing the system was that they should not act like them. Politicians had a lot of criticism on the movement. In the beginning, they said that we were a bunch of spoiled kids who were there in the boulevard because we wanted to live in expensive houses on that boulevard. And then they said, they called us sushi eaters and shisha smokers. I don't know where they got that from. And then they said that we were a bunch of radical communists. And then they called us anarchists and then fascists. And all sorts of other stuff. They didn't know what to do. And we didn't want to tell them. And that was our only power against the system. And that's understanding the power relations. As people, as just simple human beings, citizens, who for the first time understood that there is a huge gap between them and those who actually decide on a policy. We had to use everything that we could in order to fight against them. Now, we don't have weapons and we don't want to use violence. God knows that Israel knows so much violence that that's probably the only tool that we should not use anymore, never. But what do we do in order to change the system? And that meant that we had to change all the rules. We had to be everywhere. And that's not only on the streets, but really everywhere. We decided to sit in government committees, in the financial committees, and express our opinions. Why not, if we can do it? We decided to get into meetings with politicians, to be on the streets, but also to go on buses and ask people to join, and to go into schools and educate and start education programs and do absolutely everything. There is no place where the social justice movement doesn't exist. But if to go back to the beginning, we're still on the very first days, and we're still talking about housing, but we know that actually we're talking about a much bigger issue. After only a few days, people knew that this was not a protest about housing, that housing is a symbol. It's a home, and it's about everything that you want to have in your home. Everything, from our education system that was privatized and corrupt, and to the healthcare system and welfare, and how we want to treat our workers and how we want to treat our grandparents. It's about everything, and how we stop conflicts. So we decided to call for a first big rally. Now, demonstrations before July 2011 included the maximum of 500 people standing in front of some empty governmental building with little signs, very gloomy. It always felt like there was a cloud of rain, pouring rain only on top of our heads. shouting for nothing and then going to complain on Facebook. But this time we're calling for a demonstration, and 25,000 people show up. And the next week we're calling for another one, and 150,000 people come. And the next week, 300,000 people, and then it's going up and up till we have 500,000 people on the streets. That would be the equivalent of 19 million Americans on the streets, shouting, "The people demand social justice." It's a beautiful and amazing thing. And it's a thing that was for me, it wasn't the end of it. It wasn't a big success. The day after, I would imagine that the sky would be pinker, or that at least, some minister will decide to resign and take responsibility, but no, none of that happened. The system is still there watching, trying to remain exactly the way it is. But we know that something is happening. We know that this is a cry of a lot of people, not only in Israel, but all around the world, crying for a new world, wanting to replace the old one that we're sick of with a new one that talks about new freedoms, sharing of that political process. There are ways of doing that. We're practicing them already. When we go to negotiations with politicians, we don't go there with bare hands. We take our Facebook or Twitter with us. So when we sit with politicians, they know that everything that they say go immediately online, and they have to answer to questions, not only from me as a representative, but from all of my Facebook friends and their friends, and from the entire movement. Today, the media started to ignore us, so we're using the internet even more. And that's where your role is. This is an active group. We're going from pacifism to activism, so you have to be part of it. And that's about creativity. When you really do and practice open source, you have to trust people to be creative. You have to trust the collective knowledge. When we wanted, in our first demonstration, to show our list of demands, we were quite terrified because we had to email all the other tent camps and tell them to write their list of demands. And we didn't know if their demands will comply with our demands, and maybe we're not part of the same movement, and what should we do? But on the day of the demonstration, all of them emailed me their demands, and I was amazed to see that they wanted exactly the same things. And it's only a matter of trust. Trust people, and they'll just do it. So I trust you to add more ideas and creativity to our idea and share it so that we can have better ideas for how to confront that system and to pass these ideas forward. I think when I talk about open source and about that new form of politics, I have a very simple dream in mind. If we put copyrights on that dream, it will never work. It will never succeed. If you want to make dreams come true, you really, really have to make them as free as possible. You have to make people feel like these dreams actually belong to them. So that's what we're doing. And I hope that you'll become part of this movement as well. It's not an Israeli movement. It's definitely a global movement. And the good news is that it's going to succeed. Thank you.